Hi, I'm Thann Bennett. Thank you for listening to The Equipped. Faith Radio podcasts are only possible because of your support. Thank you for giving and for sharing with a friend. When I was a kid, I think it is safe to say that I was chasing fantasies. Hey everyone, I'm Thann Bennett. Welcome into The Equipped. So glad that you are along for the conversation. I'm going to return to that thought about chasing fantasies in just a moment. Also, we are going to talk about $69.5 billion in immigration law enforcement. We're going to talk about war powers, and the greatest of all time returns. When we come to the end of our broadcast, as we always do, we will posture ourselves in beauty. This week, that segment will be titled Life from Death. And if all of this sounds random to you, we do this every week. We are the Equipped community. We are a gathering of Jesus followers that come together to view all things in our world through the lens of the true and the beautiful. And so we always bracket our consideration of world events and headline news through the lens and between the bookends of the true and the beautiful. We close in beauty so we can posture ourselves in that beauty as we return to the world, but we always start by standing on truth, biblical truth. If you want to find out more about our community, you can hop on over to theequippednewsletter.com. This week in the true, why and how was I chasing fantasies? I will tell you right now on the true. So when I was a kid, I think I was chasing fantasies, and I use that phrase, chasing fantasies, because of what it says in Proverbs 12:11, which says, "Those who work their land will have abundant food, but those who chase fantasies have no sense." When I was a kid, I really had two dream careers in mind, and in all honesty, it was a plan A and a plan B. There were two of them, but the second was really just a fallback in case the first one didn't pan out, because the primary goal was an ambitious one, and it was that I wanted to be the starting shortstop for the Chicago Cubs. And I spent hours and hours and hours playing in the yard, dreaming about and practicing for that goal. I would pretend that it was Game 7 of the World Series, 3-2 count, bases loaded. I think every kid baseball player has this dream, right? And I would be up to the plate, and I would be the hero of the game. And I would tell you at about age 10, my confidence in this dream was very high. My very short Little League career at that point and the success that I had experienced, it really convinced me that this was possible. And no matter how ambitious this dream was, I really thought that I could achieve it. But I would tell you with a little bit of humor, but also some sincerity here, looking back, I really think I peaked as a baseball player at the age of 10. I'd been playing for a number of years, obsessing about it, and I think a lot of my peers were just sort of coming to the game, and so at that level, I had a great amount of success, but as my peers got more time in the game, it was clear that many of them were more gifted than me. Now, I played the game for about another quarter century, really until knee injuries and a shoulder surgery kept me from playing. And in all honesty, even now, many years after that, I still continue to try to play church softball. I will tell you that my abilities continue to deteriorate, but I still love the game of baseball and now the iteration of it that is softball. But looking back at my 10-year-old self, I think it was probably clear to everyone but me that I was a pretty good small-town player, but I was nowhere close to what it would take to be a big leaguer. I think probably most people knew that when I was 10, even if I didn't. My dream career was not going to happen. And so it was a good thing I had a backup. My backup plan, my fallback dream, Again, it's baseball themed, Chicago Cubs themed. I wanted to be the play-by-play radio broadcaster for the Chicago Cubs. When I was outside in the backyard playing baseball, whether it was playing by myself or with friends, the soundtrack of those summer games would be Cubs radio as they played day games during the summer. This is something that the Cubs have done for a long time, and it really endeared them to me as I was a child. Their games would be during the day, and they would be playing over the radio while I was playing baseball. And so when I was young, Tom Brenneman was the play-by-play guy, but when I was about 14 years old, he gave way, he moved on to another job, and Pat Hughes became the radio broadcaster. Now, when I heard that Tom was leaving, I was distraught. I really just thought that this thing that I loved was being taken away from me, but Pat very quickly won me over, and I fell in love with him, and I was sure that when it was time for him to move on from that job, I would be ready to take it. Now, fast forward more than 30 years. Pat is now a baseball Hall of Famer, and he is still calling games for the Chicago Cubs from the radio booth more than 30 years later. He has proven to have a ton of longevity in the job. And to be honest with you, he feels like a personal friend to me. I think maybe I've said this on this broadcast before. I've never met him, but his voice has become a very familiar one in my life as I continue to listen to the Cubs on the radio. He's a Cubs legend now, and I feel such affinity for him that I don't even resent the fact that he never relinquished his hold on my fallback dream job to give me a chance at it. Not that I really had a chance at it, but he has held that job now for more than 3 decades. And so the point of these two stories is that both of my childhood career goals were fantasies. Now, that is not to say that they were bad things to dream about. In fact, I think it is very beneficial for all of us to have things to be aiming for, especially as we are children. But these two ambitions were always very unlikely to come to fruition. And, at one point when I was younger, that reality might have been somewhat veiled for me, and it was probably good that it was. But I would tell you this, it was not lost on the God of the universe. The God of the universe had plans for me, and he has always been faithful to give me, to use the phrase from our verse of the day, Proverbs 12:11, he's been faithful to give me land to work. His ways and his thoughts have always been higher than my ways and my thoughts, and I am so very grateful for his patient guidance as I have imperfectly walked out that path. And so I would ask you today, what are your dreams? Maybe you're 10 years old. Maybe you're much older like me. Let's just say that, much older. What are your dreams? And to be clear, I want to remind you, your dream is not necessarily a fantasy like the childhood dreams I shared with you today. I would say far from it. We read in Psalm 37, verse 4, it says, "Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart." Now, I want to very quickly say that this is way more than a promise that God will just bring your dreams to reality and that whatever you dream, it is what God has for you. That is not the context of this verse. God may do that. He may have put those dreams in your heart and he may bring them to reality, but this is more than that. This is a promise that the God of the universe will be found by you as your desires are transformed to be in likeness with his, and as they are increasingly rooted in him. Essentially, this is a promise that as your primary dream and goal becomes one of delighting in the Lord, you don't need a fallback plan. You don't need a fallback plan because if you fervently seek him, you will find him. Jeremiah 29, 13, and 14. I wrote a book about this, In Search of the King. But here's the thing. You don't need a fallback plan because he is not hiding. If you seek him, you will find him. You won't be chasing a fantasy. You will be enthralled in the work that is bringing glory to your God. That is an end goal in and of itself, bringing glory to God. In fact, it's your highest call in life. And if that weren't enough, while you are in that pursuit, your God has promised that through that work, He, the owner of the cattle on 1,000 hills, He will provide for you. And so our reminder from the true this week, don't chase fantasies. Instead, work the land that God has given you. From chasing fantasies to headline news, it is time for us to turn our attention to world events around us, standing on that truth, looking toward beauty. We're going to start with a story about $69.5 billion in immigration law enforcement. Congress has approved these funds. They are for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, CBP. Those funds fund those two agency offices through the end of the current presidential term, so about another 3 years. This bill was considered through a process that might have become familiar to you by now. It's called budget reconciliation. The main advantage of this procedure is that it allows for a simple majority approval in the United States Senate, so 50 votes plus 1, 51 if the vice president's tiebreak is needed, rather than requiring the 60 votes that is needed to overcome procedural hurdles on most measures. Now, there were two items that slowed this measure down during the process. One was in the bill, one was actually outside the bill. The one in the bill was $1 billion in funding for the ongoing construction of the White House ballroom. And then the second was an announcement that had been made by the Department of Justice to establish a $1.8 billion, what they called anti-weaponization fund. It was for payouts to those that the DOJ deemed had been unfairly prosecuted. In the end, both of these things were very controversial, and the ballroom funding came out of the bill, and the Department of Justice announced that it would not pursue the anti-weaponization fund for now, at the direction of a court order that had come down ordering that to be paused. And so with those two issues resolved, at least for the short term, the United States Senate first advanced the measure by a vote of 52 to 47. There was only one crossover vote. It was mostly party line vote. And then the U.S. House followed suit by a vote of 214 to 212. Again, a party line vote with the one independent in the House voting with the Democrats against the bill. So it passed by a margin of 2 votes. And so that bill cleared Congress. The president is expected to sign it, and it will become law. When we zoom out and think about how we should interact as Jesus followers with this story, I would start with just an observation that the baseline provisions in this bill were already contentious. There are two sort of competing narratives on this. Republicans say that the funding is necessary to secure the border and enforce the law, and Democrats claim that ICE and CBP use overly punitive tactics and need to be reformed. These are two narratives that really don't overlap with each other at all. But even though they were contentious, it was these two other issues, the ballroom funding and the anti-weaponization funding, that proved to be the tipping point between defeat of the measure and enactment of the measure. Now I would anticipate that the White House will return to a plan to complete the ballroom with private dollars, and I think we just have to wait and see whether or not the Department of Justice returns to its plans to try to establish this anti-weaponization fund. It can be very difficult to wade through all of these competing narratives and to get to the heart of the issue. But I just want to point out a couple of biblical narratives that no matter where you land on these issues, these really should underpin your consideration of these matters. On the immigration law enforcement issue, you are to be in prayer for and to respect those who are responsible for governing and leading in law enforcement. We find that in 1 Timothy 2 and Romans 13. You are also to show kindness and hospitality and generosity in the Spirit of Christ to both the citizen and the foreigner, Deuteronomy 10 and several other chapters as well. And it is tempting to conflate those two things, the governing role and your individual role as a Jesus follower. And if we conflate those things, it makes it nearly impossible for them to fit inside the narrative of either political party. It is only by recognizing and affirming the biblical role that God has given to you as a Jesus follower, and then a distinct role that God has given to those leading, that we begin to be able to stand on a firm foundation. I would tell you that on the two controversial issues of the ballroom and the anti-weaponization fund, public sentiment is going to follow partisan lines almost completely. But as a Jesus follower, you should be considering each of them on the merits. Don't look first through what your particular party is advancing or the narrative that is coming out of them. That might be the correct position, but you will only know for sure if you start with a biblical lens and consider each of those issues on their merits. Hi, Faith Radio family. Thann Bennett here with a special invitation for you. So much in our world today is screaming for us to be consumed by fear and division and brokenness, but the promise of the gospel means that our foundation is secure. We should live not from a place of fear, but instead our lives should be marked with power and with love and with sound minds. And so every week I'm sending out the Equipped newsletter. Every issue opens with truth from God's Word. From that vantage point of truth, we look at a handful of current events in our world. We do it not to simply consume information, but we do it looking for opportunities for the gospel of Jesus Christ to inject love and healing and redemption into those who need it. We close every issue with a simple reminder of something that is beautiful in our world. I want to invite you to join our community. You can sign up at theequippednewsletter.com. That'll trigger an email back to you. Just click to confirm. Again, it's theequippednewsletter.com. I'll see you there. The House of Representatives, by a vote of 215 to 208, has approved a resolution that instructs U.S. President Donald Trump to end the U.S. military operation in Iran. Now, this does not mean that the president has to do that. It would have to pass the Senate in order for it to be binding, and also it would be subject to a presidential veto. The measure in the House did not pass by a veto-proof margin. There were 4 Republicans that joined with Democrats to pass the measure. It is not expected that the Senate will take up the measure, and even if it were to pass, the president would be expected to veto it, and neither chamber would be expected to have the margin necessary to override a veto. And so with that in context, it is just important to acknowledge that this resolution is very unlikely to become law, but it does indicate a growing impatience with the prolonged military action in Iran. Now, a lot of that angst, a lot of that consternation stems from the fact that the conflict is ongoing. There has been no formal declaration of war, so even though these are very warlike activities, it's why you will hear the phrase military conflict a lot, because there has not been a declaration of war. And that is one of the issues that is very important for you as a Jesus follower to understand as you're considering a story like this. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress very clearly and individually the power to declare war. It simply says the Congress shall have power, and then it lists a number of powers, and one of them is the power to declare war. Now, this is one of only a handful of absolute grants of power to a particular branch of the federal government, in this case, the Article 1 branch, the Congress. And yet there has long been very significant and intense debate and disagreement in how to apply this. There are really very few serious scholars that dispute Congress's authority to declare war, but there becomes a question about how much authority does the Article 2 branch, specifically the commander-in-chief as the primary leader of the military, how much authority does the president have to conduct military actions absent the declaration of war? And many, many presidents in a row now have directed some form of military operation without a war declaration. And so this has become a common flashpoint between the Article 1 branch and the Article 2 branch. As a military engagement gets lengthier, just by general rule, the consensus is that a president's authority to act without Congress gets weaker. Now, you're going to get a whole bunch of different opinions about how quickly that gets weaker and what are the criteria that causes a president's authority to wane, but essentially everyone agrees that as time wages on, it becomes more and more warlike, and there needs to be a declaration of war. There are also very specific timelines where the president has to report back to Congress. We won't dig that deep into the conversation on this broadcast. But all of that to say this, This week's vote in the House of Representatives is a sign that a weakening of that presidential authority is indeed occurring. Now, Congress is not particularly close to the consensus that would be required to enact such a measure, but the appetite against the military conflict is growing. What should you do about this? Well, first, you as a Jesus follower should be praying and seeking peace. Psalm 34:14. But that is not just as simple as a cessation of war. Just ending war is not what it means to obtain peace. We are looking for a peace that surpasses all understanding and is possessed by individuals who give their faith and trust to the Lord Jesus Christ. We should also be fervently praying for relief for the oppressed, Isaiah 1:17, and that includes those who are living in Iran under this oppressive Iranian regime. It includes those who are suffering the impact of the terroristic habits of the Iranian regime. They're the largest state sponsor of terror in the world, and those who are oppressed under that regime should be held up in prayer. I would tell you that these are difficult balances to strike, and it once again highlights a divergence of duties. There's an individual duty that you and I have as Jesus followers, and then there is a governing duty to be devoted to the law and to the restrictions of authority that the Constitution affords. But your duty is to those who are oppressed. And I would add to that, you also have a duty to hold accountable those who are in power and those who should be restricted by the Constitution and by the force of law. The greatest of all time is back. Serena Williams, who is considered by many, including me, to be the greatest female tennis player of all time. She has returned to professional competition at the age of 44. It had been more than 4 years since she had played the sport competitively. Williams has won 23 Grand Slam singles championships, but she made her return this week playing doubles. She's playing doubles at the HSBC Championships. She played alongside a playing partner who was 25 years her junior. At 19 years old, the duo won their match 7-6, 6-2, and advanced to the second round. As we think about this story, I'm just reminded that even the greatest among us have a limited time to compete at the highest level. And I say that while currently gimpy. I'm limping around as a result of having pulled a hamstring, trying to compete at a much lower level than the greatest of all time. But I would tell you it gives me more appreciation for Serena's return at the age of 44. It's a testament to her tenacity, to her ability, and it is going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. But I would tell you that you too have a limited time to run this earthly race. Your life's journey very likely won't include the bright lights of a tennis grand slam, or to reach back to our true segment, to the beauty of a big league ball field. It might not include those things, but your life does carry even greater consequence. I love Hebrews 12:1, which talks about how you and I should run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Fortunately for you and for me, our race doesn't require peak athletic ability like Serena Williams. It does, however, require vigilance and being attuned to the tactics that the enemy will use against you, 1 Peter 5:8. And so that enemy would like nothing more than to keep you off the field, out of the game, on the sideline, not engaged. But let's let this story about the greatest of all time returning to professional tennis at the age of 44, let's let it inspire us to be doggedly determined to run our life's race and to do it for the glory of God. It's time for the beautiful, and to get the most out of this segment, you need to either open your email if you are a subscriber to the Equipped newsletter, or you can click on over to theequippednewsletter.com, click on archives, and this week's edition, you can scroll to the bottom and take in the image provided by my wife, Brooke. It is a depiction from nature about life commingled with death. And when you bloom and produce life and flourishing where God has rooted you, this is what happens in your life. It transforms dead places into living ones. John 5:24. And so I just want to encourage you this week, don't confuse the decay around you with defeat. It just might be that is the place that God has chosen for your flourishing. John 5:24 says this, "Very truly I tell you, whoever hears my words and believes him who sent me has eternal life and will not be judged, but has crossed over from death to life." What a beautiful thing and a beautiful promise. I'm Thann Bennett. This is The Equipped. Thank you for being here, and I will talk to you again next time. Thank you for listening to this conversation from The Equipped. These conversations are available because of your support. Become a supporter now at myfaithradio.com. And please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes, and share it with friends so together we can stay informed and be equipped to serve.